1984 by George Orwell. Part 1, Chapter 1.
All right, everyone. It is August 4th, 2019. I am here with DaibpDaibp. I am broadcasting out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And my friend Daibp, where are you broadcasting from today?
The Fair Isle of Jersey in the English Channel.
Fair Isle of Jersey. I haven't heard of that until now.
It's the old Jersey of New Jersey fame.
Gonna have to look that up later so I can know where that is at geographically, because I don't right now. But we're gonna talk about the first chapter of 1984 today, and what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna test it out for the first couple chapters. We're not exactly sure the best method to approach this, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick out maybe a passage, a sentence, or a paragraph that stuck out to us, and we're going to discuss it. How's that sound, Daibp?
It sounds good to me. We just had a rather interesting, pretty cool chat where we established that both of us have read the book before when we were younger, and it was interesting that we had similar first impressions, that it's a warning about communism, and there's it kind of in some regards brought about a fearful state. And for me, I read it a second time round, and my views then were slightly more InfoWars paranoid-ish, and I was viewing it more as this is what's being done. And the third thing which kind of came out for me in our prequel was I'm going into the book with a preformed view where I'm expecting to see it as an allegory for the way things are now, but also that as well as it revealing some truths about the way things are now, it does seem to be also interspersed with some things which can lead you into a fear-based state of mind. So in some regards, I'm viewing it as we discussed on the site about the Bible, where it's a hoax which contains some truths, but may also contain some less useful things as well.
Yeah, definitely. I went through the same phase, because I remember I had the audiobook. I downloaded it when I was in that InfoWars phase, and you're like, this is good, this is what's going on, but
it's happening,
it's hell on earth. But no, it's after stumbling on JLB's site, I only reread a few passages, the ones he mentioned that highlight the history hoax or the war hoax or the dinosaur hoax. So it's definitely going to be interesting going around rereading the book without, the hell on earth glasses, and try to parse through the allegory or the over-exaggerations from maybe what the message Orwell is trying to get across. So it should be interesting. I guess I'll start it off, because the first sentence when you read the book, it starts, "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. And that stuck out to me because clocks are probably one of the most used inventions of our times right now. And to function off stuff like hours, minutes, seconds, days, weeks, months, years, it's like tempus mortem. It's lifeless time. We're functioning on a clock, like machines run on clocks. But now that looking at a clock and measuring time is so part of our culture and in everyday lives, it might be something that we kind of look past. And I believe that setting up your day by, different divisions of time. I'm going to do this at this time. I'm going to eat breakfast at 9 a.m. I'm eating lunch at 1:30. It's mechanical behavior, and over time, constantly engaging with it, it has the ability to promote unconsciousness, because you're not functioning off the sun, which, you could consider as a clock, or you're not functioning off of your own biological clock. I'm hungry now, I will eat, or I'm tired, I'm going to go to sleep now. It's way more structured than that, because I have to get up at this time to work. I got to be there at this time. I take my lunch at that time. It's taken this abstract idea of time and its different measurements, and now we're applying it to our real world, which it's, as I said at the beginning, is a bit of lifeless. Sorry if I rambled on there a bit.
I wouldn't worry. Rambling's the way I work out what I'm thinking. From that first sentence, the thing that had jumped out to me was that the book is starting in April, and April, on supposedly older way of starting the calendar, was the start of the year, because spring is the start of a new cycle. It's time of rebirth. In Christian chronology, it's the time of the resurrection, which literally means to rise again. And I hadn't really thought about clocks, but obviously that's time as well, which has a start and a finish. But then also the fact that he says it's striking 13.
Yeah, I was just to say, I noticed it striking 13 too, and then it says the flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39, 13 times 3. Just kind of noticed that too.
Oh yeah, there's a few bits of numerology I was noticing. I mean, as it was starting, just 1984 on its own, I hope my maths is correct, it's 22, and in tarot the 22 cards are the major arcana. The numbered ones go up to 21, and then the 22nd, but also the 0th card is the Fool, and like the path of the Fool is similar to the hero's path. So this first, with the title of the book and then the first sentence, it kind of, just looking at through the numbers, made me start to think of and with April, this is the start of some kind of a fool's journey or a hero's path, start of a new cycle. And with a cycle or the fool's path, the end usually has something to do with the beginning.
Very interesting stuff. That's why you keep going through it, because you pick up on little things like that.
The other thing from just the first paragraph, because you also get victory mansions, then through the first chapter you get victory cigarettes, victory gin. And coming from where I come from, we had German troops here in the Second World War, and even nowadays if they're going to name something, it's named like Liberation Bus Terminal or something. And it's always Liberation this or Liberty that. And it's that kind of, even calling something victory still carries a fear-based connotation, because you think, well, you're not being scared, you're celebrating the victory, but it carries in it, if you don't follow the rules or what the system says, then the system which got us out of the war, so you've got to carry still some fear connotations in the word.
I understand, because maybe if you didn't stick to the plan or the system, we would have lost, and we would have been losers, not victors. Maybe another way of looking at it. Anything else stood out to you on the first page?
And that was fun. I mean, the other thing was for the second paragraph. I mean, obviously, we both said the first time we read it, it reminds you of those warnings of communism, and that first sentence of the second paragraph is, the hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mat. And it just sounds like communist Russia. And then at the very end of it, it's the first time that you have Big Brother is watching you. So those are the other 2 points of that first page.
Yeah, and it also kind of hits on like this gloomy, dark sort of rhetoric that Orwell engages in when he writes this book.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we were just talking about before. So if it's an allegory for our time, that's why it's more of an allegory. Then you can't over literalize it if it is about the way things are, because I don't know, for most people living in the West, things aren't that gloomy, but you can see in an allegorical sense lots of the things that go on is being as in the West. So almost that's what makes people think it's either a manual or a warning, because it's kind of the truths are hidden by making it look like the everyday sense of it is so different.
I agree. And then once you hit over to the next page, Orwell immediately brings up the telescreen. So right away in the book, he wants to bring your attention to the telescreen. A couple pages later, there's going to be a passage about the war film. So he's basically setting up, and also for when he's in his room, he's stretching or something, and the screen can watch and hear him. So I just wanted to point out that immediately at the beginning he's bringing up the telescreen.
Yeah, and that gets interesting as it goes along, because you're right, he brings up the telescreen, and then how the thought police can monitor you, and you can never quite tell when it is. And again, if we think about that being monitored, the way it would translate into the way we're told about these things nowadays is it's released via the media. So there's just been discovery that the CIA are monitoring these things, or this is being kept an eye on. So there's less, again, it's not a direct thought police, but there's a different way in which it's manifest in the world that we live in.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe the way when he says something like Big Brother is watching you, maybe it's not like, oh, we're like watching, recording through your TV, but maybe the ideas and the false events being pumped out, maybe that can be viewed in a sense as they're monitoring you and trying to kind of manipulate your subconscious and maybe like how you think about what's really going on. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of in this test tube and, the screen is what's keeping you informed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one thing that's unusual, and it shows how easily people will accept a new way of being. Because the first time I read George Orwell, if I'd have spoken to people back then, the idea that you could be monitored the whole time would have been shocking to people. Like, people were already talking about, well, people were legitimately worried about those things, and then they came in and no one really batted an eyelid. But the reason I say that is it just kind of shows how, as much as people say, oh, the people won't stand for this, there's no people accept anything. So it makes you wonder if we did have more liberties, say 20 years ago, probably was nothing to do with the fact that people fought for them or would never have laid them down. It's just that we were allowed to have them then, and maybe we won't be allowed to have them now. But I can't see that I think people will accept whatever they're told they're going to accept.
Yeah, and it kind of just touches on the ever-changing definition of freedom. And I guess watching you, I guess maybe in a way you can say that's conditioning you, because like they're pumping out the crap on the media at the end of the day, its purpose is to change the way you think and to maybe orient it towards what they want you to think and whatever is a part of, their plan or agenda.
And I remember a while back on the site, JLB was talking about, well, if we are being monitored, is that something which you should actually be worried about? Or if you're living correctly, then kind of the idea of Big Brother almost brings out, it tells you, like inside yourself, it kind of brings out if you are living properly or not. But then just reading, when you first read about what Winston's room is like, whether it should bother you or not, the way that I am, I can tell whether it should or it shouldn't. There's that just horrible creepiness about the whole setup.
Yeah, and it might have been one of those things, like part of his rhetoric, like, oh yeah, it's watching you. It may add to like the sort of creepy factor in the book.
Whilst we're talking about the telescreen, I'm just skipping ahead to page 8, because there's something which is very interesting for me here, because at the beginning we talked about April being the start of a cycle and 1984 being you could have 22 as the number of the fool, because it says, for some reason, the telescreen in the living room was in an unusual position. Instead of being placed, as was normal, in the end wall where it could command the whole room, it was in the longer wall opposite the window. And because of this setup, Winston was able to remain outside the range of a telescreen. He could be heard, but so long as he stayed in his present position, he could not be seen. And in the book, it's almost like the way that your faces can give you away. So it made me wonder, why is it that Winston has this particular flat where he's able to do this? If there's an element of, in a Truman Show sense, of actively being initiated. Now, I don't want to do any spoilers, but we will see as the book goes on how that turns out for him. But is he, even when he was given his flat, was there a reason why he gets it, where he's able to start doing, because he's about to start writing his diary, which he couldn't have done if he didn't have that particular setup?
Yeah, I agree. It's just, when I was reading, I'm like, the main character so happens to get this, this perfect room where he can like hide and can't be seen and where he can write in his diary.
And the diary he writes, the date, because we now find out the exact date, which is April the 4th, 1984. And for April the 4th, that's 17, which is the star in tarot, which had that significance in the Truman Show. And if you add up the full, including the year, it's number 7, which again is it's a week, so it's the whole It's a whole cycle from the beginning to the end. So here we're at the beginning of some cycle and perhaps some revelation, which made me think, why him? And some thoughts which follow on further down in the chapter, I started to wonder at this point if perhaps Winston, and I wouldn't have thought this if I hadn't read the book before, if perhaps Winston could be viewed as a PC in a predominantly NPC world.
That's tough to say, because then we're not there yet in the book, but when he meets O'Brien, yeah, it would seem like Winston's more of an NPC than O'Brien's more of a PC. So yeah, it's kind of weird how that it contrasts later in the book.
Because Winston's scanning faces, like he sees the girl, and he has some revulsion at her because she looks like, I don't know, just such a herdswoman, and all the people as they're screaming at old Goldstein. So it's kind of like he's stuck with all these NPCs. But when he sees O'Brien, he looks at him and he thinks that O'Brien's look says, "I am with you." So it's like Winston. He's not, perhaps not a full NPC, but he's stuck because when they have the 2 minutes hate, as it starts, he doesn't like. Well, he hates the 2 minutes hate. But he says at some point you can't help but join in. So he's being dragged into this like herd NPC mentality, but at the same time he's trying to look at O'Brien to think, is this someone who's like me? And he thinks his face is. He's like trying to do a Turing test on O'Brien to see if he can see something in his face which says that he's not like everyone else, and I'm not like everyone else either.
Yeah, it kind of touches upon our mass society. However, it's kind of like depersonalized, and you kind of have to go along with the group think to kind of just get ahead and live your life.
Even when he starts writing his diary, I mean, he says he doesn't even know why he's starting to write, and then he gives a reason, which is, it's for the future, for a generation to come or something. And he straight away contradicts himself and says, but how can you write to the people who haven't come yet? How can you write to the future? And then, so I don't think that's his real reason. And then he just starts writing down all the things he did that day. It's like a stream of consciousness. And he says that he transferred his restless monologue. So again, it's like he's trapped in this NPC world, but in his head, he has this restless monologue going. And perhaps he doesn't even know if anyone else has one. And the only way he can prove it to himself is just to start writing it down.
It's funny how he kind of mentioned, it was kind of tough to, I had these thoughts, and then he gets the notebook, pen in his hands, like, all right, start writing down your thoughts. And it's like, kind of blank. I've definitely had that feeling before. It's like I'm in my car, I'm just driving. I have all these thoughts. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna pull up my phone, hit record, and just re-listen to it later. It's like, as soon as you hit record, and you're like, all right, I'm actually gonna transfer these thoughts into written words or speech. You're kind of like, okay, what was I thinking again? You kind of I've had that. You just get hesitant. You're like, I don't know. I don't usually do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're in that monologue, it's going perfectly, and then when you try to sit down, you're separating yourself from your thoughts. You're like, right, I need to really write something significant now. If I'm milking cows, I work out like all sorts of stuff, but by the time I get home, you can't write it down. And the only decent stuff that I get written down is if when I'm in the middle of that monologue, I just start typing away, and then it comes out, and then afterwards I can then fiddle around with it with my other part of my brain. So it's maybe I should carry around a recorder, but the best stuff is when I'm already in that monologue and I manage to just be at the right place so I can get it down, and then the work does itself.
I agree. Sometimes I like to I have a little journal. I like to reach over and sometimes I'll get up from bed. Because, I don't know, for me, that's when I have a lot of thoughts. I just get up from bed and start writing them down. Or, nowadays and age, you can just pull out your phone and put it into your notes, something that you can look back at later.
And because after he does that monologue, he just writes down what he's been doing that day, that's when his mind goes off. He says, but the curious thing that while he was doing so, a totally different memory had clarified itself in his mind to the point where he almost felt equal to writing it down in the diary, that his stream of consciousness. He stopped writing and he says it was a stream of rubbish. He said, but the curious thing was that whilst he was doing so, a totally different memory had clarified itself in his mind to the point where he almost felt equal to writing it down. That is when he moves in his memory to the Ministry of Truth, when he's about to see O'Brien, and it's building up to the 2-minute hate.
To side of sidetrack here, one thing I just want to bring up is just the 3 slogans of the party, which he mentions on page 6. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So with that in mind, it's worthy noting that the first thing he writes down in the diary is the war film that he saw, which I think there's some significance there. And if you want to go through, we can kind of like pick apart that little passage and then continue from there. I have kind of like separated comments. So, I mean, immediately there's the ship full of refugees being bombed somewhere in the Mediterranean. The audience much amused. So right away, that's kind of interesting because the image of death, people dying, bombs exploding, and here he's saying the audience is enjoying this. So I guess it makes you think about the impact of the television, maybe how it has these civilized people actually lusting for blood and enjoying violence. Maybe they choose to do this. Probably, I don't think it's because violence is probably one of the easiest things that can grab people's attentions. But worthy noting that the audience is actually enjoying seeing this violence.
Well, yeah, and it fits in with the war hoax. It was something I was talking to JLB about, and it was an idea which I had. I was trying to think how the war hoax could be a white pill, and what my thoughts were is that if we have this tendency in our nature for violence, by providing fake wars, it satiates that hunger for violence without wars actually having to happen. And then that's when John had pointed out that the slogan war is peace, because that's why war is peace, because if you have these fake wars, then people's warlike tendencies are satiated and you actually end up having peace.
That is a good explanation. I think something for like ignorance is strength. Then, if we're going to touch on the slogans, I guess it's strong because it's like they're not even aware of the techniques that are being done for them to actually sit there and enjoy the gore and bloodshed, and to accept the ideas that people are overseas shooting each other down or whatever that happens. There's a lot of conditioning involved with that. So if being ignorant to the conditioning, I guess, makes you strong, and I guess the system strong as well.
And then you have your victory gin, etc., and then you have freedom and slavery. So whatever the victory was for, it wasn't for freedom.
Excellent.
It was for the system.
Excellent. And then what's interesting about this passage is, helicopters, gun sights, then he was full of holes, and the sea around him turned pink as he sank suddenly as though the holes had let in the water, the audience shouting with laughter. And then it gets interesting. A little boy about 3 years old in her arms, little boy screaming with fright and hiding his head between her breasts as if he was trying to burrow into her, and the woman putting her arms around him and comforting him, although she was blue with fright herself. It's interesting that at the beginning, you're like the audience is laughing, people dying, getting shot up. It's funny, right? But then this little boy who's also watching this film is actually like, no, like, holy crap, he actually perceives that as real. So maybe it speaks to something how it kind of like what we just said, like that boy is not yet conditioned to violence. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, he's not there yet, and also kind of touches on how these moving images on a screen can seem so real, and that it can even be hard to distinguish like what is real and what is not. And it's funny that the young boy has this like scared reaction to it, while the audience is like, it's fun, this is awesome, they're having a great time.
I guess you see the progression of, to borrow from Brave New World, the Epsilon agenda, that the boy is at the beginning of this process, and then you see in the adults what the end product of the process is in their different responses.
Yeah, exactly. It really showed, trying to highlight that. And then again, you see, so 3 times now, it's like audience much amused, audience shouting with laughter. There's a lot of applause from the party seat. So, like, there is this emphasis that, yeah, like, he's really trying to emphasize that, like, they like this cruelty, they enjoy violence. I guess that's part of being in a, civilized society. we somehow, like, that it's already contradictory. We're so civilized, but we still love violence and bloodshed, like, already there. Contradiction.
Yeah, and this is the first thing that Winston decides to write down.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I want to stress that, like, this is the first thing, the first passage he's talking about is war and the psychological effects it has on people.
Yeah, he's trying to understand, like, what this is doing to the people that he's around.
Yeah, it seems that there's kind of like a suppression of a critical faculty, incapacity to distinguish truth from falsehood, the individual from the collectivity, action from like. So I guess I don't know what it has to do with, like, maybe something about mass psychology and being in large groups. Like I said, hard to distinguish truth from falsehood, action from talk, reality from statistics, and so on. So I guess that kind of speaks to the power of propaganda here.
And this diary entry is what leads him into his other memory, which is leading up to the 2 minutes of hate.
And another thing that's worthy to note is that in the 2 minutes of hate, Winston himself cannot keep from joining it. So it kind of speaks about how hard it is to resist this subconscious manipulation. Like, it can get so loud that even, like, you're going to join in it.
Exactly, that was one of the most significant things about the 2 minutes of hate for me. Is part of him is repulsed by it, but he says no matter how much, at some point you can't help but join in. And when I remembered that passage, I thought to myself that he joined in, and obviously that might be part of it because he doesn't want to be seen to not be joining in. But the way he says it, it seems like it's not just for show. A part of him actually wants to then join in. And then if you think about any aspect of the crowd, you think, well, is that person going along with it just because he doesn't want to look like he's not? But actually it's probably deeper, that you get so swept up that you start to think as the crowd, which is what's happening to him at that point.
Yeah, I remember it reminds me of where John actually got his name, I guess, his pseudonym from, Gustav Le Bon, the crowd. He delves more into crowd psychology and how we're influenced by being in a crowd.
Well, which in the 2 minutes of hate jumped out to me was Goldstein's, as he's on the screen and they're all hating him, his voice starts to become bleating and he starts to appear sheepish. And at the end, I think it just for a brief instant, his face becomes a sheep. Now, what that made me think of is that the person they're hating, if he's turning into a sheep and taking on these characteristics, sheep are herd-like creatures, and the people who are hating him are the herd. So they're kind of being programmed. They're basically hating themselves for being the herd.
Interesting. Which page is this one on? I'm trying to look at it.
On the ebook I'm using, it starts on the 17th page, the end of a paragraph, and it says the dull rhythmic tramp of the soldier's boots form the background to Goldstein's bleating voice.
It's all good. Just sort your thoughts out. I think I'm having trouble finding it. It's all good.
It then goes on to say about his face that it resembled the face of a sheep, and the voice too had a sheep-like quality. And then towards the end, it says, just for an instant, his face becomes a sheep. At different points, it says, the self-satisfied sheep-like face on the screen. He keeps mentioning bleating and that he looks like a sheep. And to say at the end, his face just for an instant becomes a sheep. just as and the more he does, the more people start to jeer. So they are the sheep and the herd. The only people that they really hate are themselves, which is kind of often, it's not an unusual thing, I think, for when people who are very agitated or triggered or upset, the thing that they're really probably upset with is normally themselves.
Another thing that was interesting is that he starts one of these paragraphs and it says, as usual, the face of Goldstein, the enemy of the people, had flashed on the screen. The fact that he says, as usual, it's like, yeah, this is a typical reoccurring occurrence where this Goldstein guy is projected and people are able to direct their hates towards him.
And then after they hate him, they go completely to the opposite side and start chanting, be like Big Brother, Big Brother. They're hating themselves in Goldstein, and then their immediate response is to start chanting for Big Brother, Big Brother.
Yeah, it's really eerie. And the whole time you say, like, the crowd are hissing, the woman gave a squeak of mingled fear and disgust. So at the whole time, it's like, you just get this real sense of, like, fear, anxiety, and chaos that is going on during these 2 minutes of hate.
And this memory of, first of all, hating Goldstein, then chanting for Big Brother, leads him to start writing in his diary, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother. Each part leads on, and then now he is involved in his own, like, written mini 2 minutes of hate, but his is directed to Big Brother.
And then there's a passage and a sentence in there that says, but still it was more an act of self-hypnosis, a deliberate drowning of consciousness by means of rhythmic noise. That was definitely a theme that was common in Brave New World, where when the kids are, like, growing up, they're constantly being instructed from these, like, rhythmic sounds and noises. Apparently, so the 2 minutes of hate, where these people can make these chants, it's promoting further unconsciousness. Like, it's almost like keeping them down in that lower mental state.
Well, self-hypnosis I've self-hypnotized myself before into some odd beliefs. I've mentioned it on the last call I did that I used to be an Orthodox Christian monk, and probably people won't know much about this, but one of the standard spiritual things that they do is called the Jesus Prayer, and it has various forms. But a lot of the saints and monks say you should be saying this as much as you can, like even under your breath or in your head. And you're basically saying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And people go around saying it to themselves like the whole time, or they try to. And you're basically hypnotizing yourself. And then you're getting up early morning, and the first thing you do is you're saying it in the dark, and you're like still half asleep. And it's exactly the same thing. Like, the standard spiritual technique is basically hypnotizing yourself. And then you see it in Eastern religions with their like repetitive mantras. That word self-hypnosis, it took me back to some strange times.
Yeah, and that's a nice piece of anecdotal evidence you gave about your experience as a monk. And maybe stuff like slogans, repeating slogans is a part of that process. Or I remember, at least when I was at school in America, we would always say, like, the Pledge of Allegiance every day before we got class started in the morning.
In England, that always seemed like the weirdest thing in the world to us. I've seen it on film, but I could never quite believe it actually happens.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's a lot of these, self-hypnotizing rhythmic noises that we engage in a lot during the day. I mean, even something like, listening to music and people like to sing their favorite songs, that could also be considered self-hypnosis.
Yeah, well, it goes back to old Winston when he's starting his diary. He's trying to deal with that incessant monologue of thoughts, and if you have to do something new, like from anecdotal evidence, I'll start saying, I don't know why I'm doing this. This is never going to work out. And yeah, you can hypnotize yourself to fail at anything or to do the wrong thing.
Oh yeah, that made me think. Like, even like you mimic characters' behaviors in like your favorite TV show out there. You might be repeating the same lines when you get in the same stressful situation.
So a lot of the stuff in this chapter seems to, it kind of links into that, with Winston trying to deal with his programming. He's got his diary. I mentioned that I thought he may not be a full PC, but he has the potential to be. And then even at the beginning, when we noted that his room is set up in a particular way where he can do this. So I've been wondering if maybe there's someone who's purposely giving him this opportunity.
Or maybe he was innately born with it. Maybe he, lucky he came into the world with that. We came in with our rooms configured a certain way that, maybe we're allowed to have our own thoughts while others are given a room where they're unable to have that ability. Maybe that could be, a metaphor for something.
And as you were saying it, the room, it reminds me of his own room where he can go to is basically the only thing we have is our head where we can go into.
Yep. I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. So right after that anecdote about the war film that he wrote down in his diary, I thought this was a little interesting. When he meets the girl who often passed in the corridors, he did not know her name, but he knew that she worked in the Department of Fiction. And then a couple sentences, he's like, she was a bold-looking girl of about 27, which I think is 33 because 3 cubed is 27. So, Department of Fiction, this girl is 27 years old. 27 is 3 to the power of 3. I'm not trying to draw any conclusions, but just something that I noticed when I was reading.
We'll see as the book goes on. She does. Her and O'Brien, he meets them together, and they are two pretty significant people as it goes on.
Yeah, so...
And just as we're getting towards the end of the chapter, as we were talking in the pre-chat, and it hadn't come to me in advance, because at the beginning of the chapter, we learn about Big Brother on the poster, and then the Thought Police. And we were talking about how it's often viewed as the Thought Police are this organization which are the ones who are going to come and get you if you think the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. But in reality, it's usually each other who are the people that police each other's thoughts and control each other.
Exactly.
At the very end of the chapter, after he writes down with Big Brother, he suddenly gets seized with a hysteria that he sees his end straight away. So it's that same thing about a cycle. He says, they'll shoot me, I don't care, they'll shoot me in the back of the neck. And so he sees, at the beginning, he sees what he thinks is going to be his end. And then there's the knock on the door, and he's fearful because he thinks, they've come for me already, like the Thought Police. What will turn out at the beginning of chapter 2 is actually it's his neighbour who he's scared of because they report on each other in the party. So we see he's fearful of this hierarchical Thought Police, but when he thinks they're coming, it's actually his neighbour who is knocking on the door.
Yeah, exactly. And for like a piece of anecdotal evidence, it's like I'm sure you guys probably told your family or friends, 9/11, nobody died or got hurt, and then, some of the responses right away are like, oh my God, that's insulting to the victims. How dare you? or like, there's no way there was ambulance there. Like, this had to happen. Like, they can't even engage with the possibility that no one died or got hurt. They're immediately stuck on whatever they were programmed to believe here.
The FBI haven't broken down your door and dragged you away because of saying it. It's only the people around who try to control you for doing it.
Yes, precisely. Another thing I picked up on, after he meets this girl, he just goes into this diatribe of like, I hate her. So he goes on to this diatribe when he sees this young woman, and he's just like, he disliked nearly all women, and especially the young and pretty ones. I think that neighbor who walks in, I think she was a woman, who had a problem with their sink or something. But I thought it was kind of peculiar that, this is one of the things he brings up immediately in his book. He's like, right away, couple pages in, he's like, yeah, he brings up women right away like this. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe he's saying women are more easily influenced. I'm not really sure, but I think you just have to kind of keep reading the book and put the pieces together from there.
And the dangers of a pretty girl.
Yeah, it's kind of. I'm not. I believe there's a reason, but I'm not sure what the reason is. But it's very interesting that he brought that's one of the few things he brings up right away in the book.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that when I was reading it, but I'm gonna keep it in my head.
Sweet. I'm just looking through here for maybe another passage that stuck to me. Do you have any right now?
No, I think those were the main things that stuck out for me.
Another thing, I guess, for me then would be when he describes the caught police. I think it was Goldstein and his runnings with the thought police. Yeah, they're talking about spies working for him, getting caught by the police. He was a commander of a vast shadow army of underground network of conspirators dedicated to the overthrow of the state. To me, that really highlights the era in which this book was written in, where nationalist propaganda was probably a lot more prevalent. So I guess that's one consideration we should take in when reading this book, is the time that it was written in, how the stories are conveyed.
The only other thing I would add, as it's the beginning of the chapter, is I think JLB has George Orwell down as being a hoax character, but in the story of the character anyway, he works for the BBC in real life, and obviously in the book he works for the Ministry of Truth. And growing up in the British Isles, I mean, the BBC, if ever there was a propaganda machine for whatever the current social programming is, the BBC has it down to a fine art.
Yeah. I remember I was talking about the Technological Society in the pre-call, but that's one of the things Alol was alluding to, that, he actually, they would fake news. I remember he mentioned that in a passage. So I'm sure some of these stories you're probably hearing in 1984 are probably faked as well, or maybe that's implied.
Yeah, I mean, I even think, according to the official story of his life, he was like a wartime broadcaster. So if he was a real person, then that may well be how he knew about the war hoax.
Yeah, he may have seen that, similar to how, when you're Albert the Great, when you asked that woman, hey, has anybody checked any of the older records? And she was like, no, we've never done that. Maybe Orwell may have been in a similar situation, but he actually was more aware of going on around him, and he was checking, this doesn't seem real at all. You see what I'm trying to say?
Well, yeah, and one of the contradictions I've always seen with Orwell is in his life. I mean, I read Down and Out in Paris, and I read some of his other memoir books, and he even said himself he was a democratic socialist, and so many of his thought of his non-fictional writings seem to indicate, for me, is an ideology, and maybe he didn't see it this way, but an ideology which for me would lead to a 1984 kind of society. So I've always thought there's a kind of contradiction between his own personal, and he might not have seen that it would lead it there, but I always thought it was an odd thing, and it kind of adds for me to that sense where in the book, it's revealing certain truths and hoaxes, but at the same time there's some other aspects which could lead you into a very negative way of thinking, and there's that same kind of division almost in his thought between if he's warning about something, what he's warning about, and the type of political ideology which he held.
Okay, so that was a lot. I'm trying to unpack that. So you're saying that even as he writes about that, he may not even realize the own contradictions that he still holds.
Yeah, I read some of his political writing on the English language is excellent. You think, well, he's obviously arguing against that kind of thing, but he seemed to always be a committed socialist, and he said he was never a totalitarian socialist, but a democratic one. But for me, the one leads to the other. So I don't know. I don't know if he just didn't realize it, or if it was part of the same thing that you almost see in this book, where you're being revealed these things which are going to warn you about something, or are going to reveal some hoaxes. But at the same time, there's all this like fear and paranoia at the same time, which you could latch onto.
Oh, yep.
So it seems to be in his own thinking. There's these things which don't quite fit, and sometimes in the way you can see the book in such two different ways. So there's a similarity there for me, which I've never quite been able to understand.
Okay, now I see what you're trying to say. I guess to kind of add that in a tangential way is that, like, in around this time period, this sort of, future modern technical society seemed to be of great discussion amongst a lot of the thinkers of those days. Because you got 1984, then you got Huxley's Brave New World, and you got like Mr. Alol and Technological Society. You got like Eric Fromm. So yeah, this seems to be a very hot topic of discussion amongst a lot of I'll just say a lot of the big thinkers of those days.
Yeah, and then there's another part of me which thinks even what I just said is part of the whole hoax, and perhaps things just aren't as bad as we think.
Yeah, maybe. How much of like the fear in our own programming like might get in the way of our own beliefs?
Unfortunately, I have an ability, not quite like I can double think. They hold contradictory opinions at the same time, whilst believing them both to be true. And I'm not sure if they realise it or not, but I have the ability, not necessarily to hold contradictory opinions, but to hold a myriad of interpretations of something at the same time in my head. Sometimes it can be a bit exhausting.
Yeah, it seems like a common theme with like in these movies, I don't know, even like, I don't know, the Matrix or something like that. Like there really isn't one right interpretation. Like there's many different interpretations that may fit. So I don't think you have to necessarily pick one, but yeah, you should be open to entertaining a lot of these different ideas. I almost think like they do that on purpose, man. There's just so many layers with some of this content that's put out there.
But jumping ahead with Goldstein, towards the much later on, I think he asks O'Brien, was Goldstein even a real person? Was there ever really a book? And I can't remember O'Brien's exact words, but he says, the point is that you're never meant to be able to work it out. So he could have been a real person, there could have been a book, but there might not have been. It might be a complete hoax. And the point is that you're not meant to be able to know. And it kind of fits in with Lester Nedian's idea of the lie system.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say. It really, the greatest conspiracy of all of them, as he puts it. And yeah, I never noticed that connection in 1984, huh?
Well, because someone mentioned on the Discord server, because John LeBon was mentioning about people's views on Hitler, which we don't necessarily have to go into, but the reason I bring it up because someone mentioned for them he was a Goldstein-type boogeyman. But the fact that he was a Goldstein-type boogeyman doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm not saying that he was a real person or wasn't, it doesn't necessarily, you can be a Goldstein-type boogeyman and still have been a real person. But the point is that the people are not meant to be able to know if he was or he wasn't, or if he did write the book or he didn't write the book. So being a Goldstein boogeyman doesn't preclude one or the other in their reality or not.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's never sufficient evidence to really prove otherwise. So you're left to make the decision yourself.
And all you can do is look at their claim, and if the claim looks like a whole load of nonsense, you can say, well, yeah, sure, I can't know for certain, but it looks like a whole load of nonsense to me.
And the really scary part about that was like how that pushes you to make a decision on claim, and you have to use your emotions. Like, how do I feel about this? Which, as John said, that actually can build and become a habit to where anything you see, you're even though the claim is vaguely presented, like you're going to be making decisions about how you feel about it and not what evidence there is to support it.
And one claim is given the weight of authority and consensus.
Exactly, and then all other claims are ridiculed. So it really is sheep-like behavior.
Exactly. So yeah, you're left with not being able to know, a weight of consensus and authority on one side. If you think it's nonsense and you can't know the certainty on the other side, then you have to deal with the herd.
So my thing is, it's like, if you're presenting me with this claim, then the burden of proof should be on you, not on me. You know, like that Crow video. Like, hey man, if you want to really cut up all these different shots and chop it up and mix and match it, it's like, hey man, why couldn't you just put that out there in a straight manner? Why do you gotta like fiddle with it and play games with me now? So I mean, I think it's fair just to call fake on a lot of it, because it's like, the burden's not on me to prove that it's real. Like, you're presenting me with a claim, you should be proving to me that this claim is real, whether or not like Goldstein or Hitler existed. But if you want me to believe such a thing, like, the burden of proof is on you. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I imagine it like, say I tell you that I've got a unicorn in my pocket, and then you say, I don't believe you've got a unicorn in your pocket, and I say,
yeah, right, I'm not supposed to tell you. That's not on me to say.
Well, if I haven't got a unicorn in my pocket, what is in my pocket?
Yeah, it seems to be how a lot of, like, how we engage with a lot of, just say content in the world, ideas.
So you have to give me an alternative, otherwise you must believe there's a unicorn in my pocket.
To bring it back to the book for a second, another passage that kind of stuck out to me was so the paragraph right before it says the rhythmical chant of B, 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 B. It mentions the little sandy-haired woman had flung herself forward over the back of the chair in front of her with the tremulous murmur that sounded like my savior. And that stuck out to me because even these images on a screen, it's like they're so real that like people, they engage with it as if it's like hyper real. Like, if you want to use Baudrillard as his terminology, it's more real than real, honestly. And this woman even has influenced her thoughts, actions, and behavior to like act on what she sees on the screen. And that kind of makes me think about, if you ever go on YouTube, type in like dogs watching TV or something, and it's like they cannot even see that the animals that they're watching on their television are fake. Like, it's like the dog's barking there and engaging it as well. So it kind of just touches on how real things on the TV seem to be. Yeah, it just has a significant impact on people's thoughts and behaviors.
Oh, if it's on TV, then it's real.
Yeah, right. It has to, yeah, that's also touching on, like, you're conditioned to accept authority and authority figures.
But I saw it on TV. I saw it on the news.
Well, you got to, one, we want to influence you.
Well, how do you explain, then, that I saw it on the news last night if it's not true? Explain that one for me.
Nah, I know. I'm trying. I don't. Yeah, it's tough, dude. I'm trying to actually give an answer. Like, why would they make you think people die?
But why would they do that?
So is it news now that everybody knows it? You know, the fact that the news, it means that it is spread far and wide, but it does not mean that the news, the information being presented, is based on any facts or evidence. The fact that it's news only means that it is spread far and wide.
Sorry, what you say? Yeah, wouldn't the news reporters speak out eventually? Wouldn't someone say something? I read I don't know if it's true, but I read there's a journalist, I think it was Peter Hitchens, who writes in England for the Mail, and he said that he was in East Germany towards the end of communism there, and he said that there were people who were near the border with West Germany, and they could pick up the radio from West Germany, and they could hear what they were saying, and they could compare it which was on the radio in East Germany. So they knew there was completely different stories being told. So they didn't believe what was in Pravda or whatever. But the people who were further away from the border, nearer towards, say, the east, they couldn't pick up the radio. So they were much more likely to believe the stories that they were given in their propaganda on the radio or on the newspapers. And the people, I can't remember the word he used, but it would be the equivalent to the people who were close to the West German borders pretty much called the people who were further east normies, because they believed everything that they were told in the paper.
It's interesting how they can kind of realize that both are lying after hearing what's going on east and west. But if you're isolated and not allowed to hear what's going on, like, the other side, then you're going to be more easily convinced. Let's put it that way.
Which is what's happening in this first chapter. Like when he writes down, they're all going to. They go and see the propaganda together. They go to the 2 minutes hate together. There's no way of stepping outside of the system they're in and seeing it for themselves.
Yeah, and even if they do, like someone like Winston, there's still like friction with the world when you try to gauge it with yourself, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety like that's coupled with that friction.
There's even some hints of it here. He realizes himself towards the end of the chapter that, his mistake, because I wonder if his mistake was thinking that he could completely escape the system rather than trying to find his own inner freedom within it, because I mentioned in the call with JLB that I kind of now see the whole world as a cult in a sense. I mean, is it possible to step outside in our world? Is it possible to step outside of the system? Seems kind of unlikely, the best that you can hope for, and it seems that we are allowed to do it. It's just whether you're persistent enough is to find your own freedom within it. I don't know if it's a slightly depressing view, but I wonder if Winston's mistake is that he feels somehow he can actually either bring down the system. He says he's going to write to the future at a time where it may be different. So either bring it down or somehow step outside. And even in the system we live in, I'm not sure that is a likely outcome.
No, and I think maybe another way of saying it would be like you can give it your body, but don't give it your mind. And I mean, anytime you try to fight the system and bring it down, it's like, you can't win, which I guess kind of foreshadows the end of 1984, where Winston he gets the book, he wants to fight, he wants to take down Big Brother, but at the end of the day, it's like, nah, it was O'Brien pulling a ruse on him.
Sorry, at the beginning, when he has his diary, he's given, and his certain flat, he's given this freedom to have his own thought. And maybe if he'd have had that, he could have had his own freedom within the system, but he takes it in a different direction, and that's ultimately his undoing. Yeah,
so it does speak to living in the system, but I guess it's, I don't know, living physically in it, but spiritually, like mentally, like you're living outside of it.
I think that's about the best, as I can see it, is one can hope for.
So anything else from the chapter you want to touch on?
No, I think that was everything that came up for me. I was wondering how you found. I mean, obviously it was our first attempt. I was with the form. I was wondering if, because obviously we kind of went a little bit around the houses. So I was wondering if perhaps next time we should exchange segments which we're particularly interested in advance, and then work through. And the reason I say that is because if anyone else does listen and thinks, oh well, I could add something to that, then they could read 2 chapters in a week and then perhaps share what points jump out at them, and then time we could have a similar format of reading out the paragraphs but exchange in advance.
Okay, so pick out which passages we like, and then break it down. Here's what I want to talk about. Have it more structured in that sense. Like, here's the passages or pages we're really going to dive into.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can go through the chapter. And then we'll know in advance that, I should pay attention to that one as well.
Okay.
It might just give a bit of structure, and then we can go off on each section as we go down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. That is a good idea. So it follows a little orderly path, instead of jumping to different parts of the chapter. And as you said, it does leave room to add thoughts on after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, that would work for me if we did that. As I say, if we managed to convince anyone else to join, because I was talking to John earlier, and with 2 people, it can be difficult sometimes because the pressure's constantly on to say something interesting. Whereas if you have a third person, you get a bit of a break because it can go round a little bit. But yeah,
That's true, but I also want the practice too. I want to get better at this.
Exactly. It does. Like I hadn't until we did it. I hadn't thought enough about what the best structure for doing it was. But I think that was what if we maybe like set a day to exchange like the key sections which have stood out for us and what page they were on, and we can just put it on one document, like those sections in order as they come, and then we can just go through them like that.
Yeah, I like that. We can do that. Going through it, this experience has like highlighted ways that we can like fine tune it, and maybe we could even find out how to incorporate audio in at some point. Like a narrator reading the text instead of us doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that would probably work well. And but as you say, I mean, the main thing for me is just I'm so blooming lazy sometimes. Just just by having the pressure of having to read the chapter by a certain point is mainly just to make myself do it.
I mean, still, even if the production quality isn't the best, hopefully we still gain something from this, help expand our thinking a bit. You definitely did present a lot of ideas that I initially hadn't considered when I read it through, so that's good.
I hadn't considered them until they started coming out of my mouth.
So one more passage I think I want to just kind of touch on here was, so right after he's talking about how bad the 2 minutes of hate thing is and how he uncontrollably joins into it, passage goes, a hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic. What I wrote down here for my first thoughts was it's like, okay, this TV runs on electricity. The images are projected through electricity, so is there somehow a wavelength that we all connect to or align ourselves with like what the content is being broadcasted in? I guess I just wrote this. Godhood is the pursuit to manipulate and control people's reality artificially. Kind of what the telescreen is.
For me, beliefs are the way that our body machine is programmed, and it's either the ones that we download into it or the ones that someone else downloads into it.
Yes, and if you have the ones that someone else had made, your files can get corrupted. Put it that way, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, people have mentioned it before, the use of the word script in computer language. If you're downloading someone else's scripts, then you're just an actor in their play.
Yeah, and this whole artificial world that is created is, whoever has the means to produce such a world, like the technology and the money to do so, in a false sense, they're playing God because they're able to manipulate so many people's reality. It's all done in their artificial mean. I guess, I don't know, maybe part of like the pursuit for power and influence, but it's kind of weird how the artificial grafts itself onto the natural.
And the thing is, and in this chapter, beginning of the next chapter, you see that when the neighbor comes, there's the children there. I mean, the children are true believers, and in this one, the child, you see that they're already starting to be programmed in the war propaganda. And you often hear when people talk about cults, they'll say something like, well, no one ever realizes that they're in a cult, or no one ever joins a cult because they don't realize it is one. But then you talk about people who are born into it, say, oh, I was born into a cult, so I had no choice. So in this system in the book, the children are born into the system. In our reality, everyone thinks that they have this choice about the system, but we're all in the same way we're born into the system, we're born into the world cult that we're in, and we're given its dogmas and propagandas. We may not see it as stark as is portrayed in this chapter, but in reality we're as much born into the system as a child is in this beginning chapter.
Yeah, excellent observation there. And I don't know if it mentions how old these kids are, but I mean, again, from that little diary passage, the 3-year-old was kind of freaked out about all this war stuff. But maybe as the kids get a little bit older, they become more adjusted, to put it like that.
It's one way of dealing with it, to adjust to the system.
Yeah, because you kind of have to, though, because imagine that if that boy never adjusted, he's, almost everything he engages with at a daily basis is just going to, kind of freak him out.
there is a pain to being someone that sees things the way they are, and there's a I guess there may be a bliss to the one who just swims in it as if it was, the water all around them.
Yeah, exactly. It's less traumatizing once you, I guess, kind of accept it.
Yeah, and nowadays, like, in fact, what I was saying, how Winston should be, I'm probably just projecting onto him the way I am nowadays, because I wander around to all intents and purposes externally, as if I'm almost disappearing, but in my head, I wonder about things and try to see it as it is.
Yeah, kind of. I'm sure there's stuff I probably engage with a lot that doesn't necessarily bother me because, we all, like you said, we're all born into the system. So there's probably certain content that maybe or things that we engage with that, we're not even realizing, like, we were indoctrinated into that.
And it can be kind of fun, like there's so much odd stuff and programming. Once you see it, some of it comes kind of.
Oh yeah, it's hilarious. Is this a joke? Like, what's going on here? Like, what am I doing?
And maybe that was poor old Winston's problem. He was just too gloomy about it. He couldn't laugh at it all. It was just all, his temperament. It was just all too much for him. It was like, in fact, maybe that's why that first line, in this chapter, I don't just thought about it, when it's all about like the cabbage and it's so bleak. Maybe that is talking about Winston's own characteristics. Maybe because I think sometimes the way that what you believe about the world could actually change the way you perceive it, and maybe his gloominess is actually changing his own perceptions. So I'm not saying the system's good, but maybe if he was able to laugh at it all, he'd have been able to deal with it a bit better.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. It's definitely, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, I kind of think it's funny. It's kind of funny too, man. Like, you gotta change my mood here. Like, yeah, man, I do laugh at some of the, I see these fake shootings they're putting out. It is kind of funny. It is spiritual murder, and that is a bad thing to do. But just kind of step back and just look at this clown show and just kind of laugh at it for what it is.
I don't mean to advertise, but I recently dropped my first YouTube video entitled Hermes, God of This World, which addresses all of these points. It's fairly short as well.
Perfect. Now everybody who's listening to this should go and check out DaibpDaibp's video.
I'm already well addicted to watching my double-digit views go up. It's my soma.
You're going viral, man. We're taking down the global one view at a time.
Yeah, I think I'm up to 25.
They're trying to shut me down, folks. They're stopping it at 25 views. That's it. No more. You gotta watch before it gets taken down, guys. You gotta hurry up here.
I'm fairly certain they're manipulating my view figures.
I'm sure they gotta stop us. No wrong, think aloud.
I stand for truth.
Yeah, I think this is probably a good part to end the call.
Yeah, but otherwise I'm gonna go slightly weird.
Yeah, we're gonna just keep clowning off. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can do it, or maybe TNG will have to come in. I'm gonna give it a shot. Yeah, huh? Okay, yep.
Hello, TNG.